Last night, the system slammed the panic button and it completely failed. On Monday, January 12th, 2026, the exchange increased silver margins by 15%, basically telling traders, pay more or step aside. The plan was simple. Make holding a silver contract so costly that the rally breaks. But on Tuesday, January 13th, silver didn't break. It exploded. It blasted higher into the high 80s, staring $90 straight in the face like the margin hike was meaningless. So the question isn't why silver is rising. The real question is what happens when the strongest weapon they have stops frightening the market. Because if margin hikes don't stop it, then what will? And that's what we're unpacking today. What just occurred, why it matters, what the futures data is quietly shouting, and why the words force majeure are suddenly being murmured around the mining side of this story. Now, before we jump in, quick reminder. If you're watching these moves and you want to stay ahead of them, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next update. This market is moving fast and being late is costly. All right, let's start with the failed smash. For decades, silver has lived under a threat that every veteran remembers. When price runs, the exchange change the rules, margins get hiked, leverage gets squeezed, weak hands get liquidated, and the chart gets painted red. We've seen versions of that playbook in past cycles. The mechanism is always the same. Raise the required cash, trigger margin calls, force selling, and reset the rally before it turns into a stampede. And on Monday, that's exactly what they attempted to do. A 15% hike sounds dull until you translate it into real money. It's thousands of dollars more per contract right now, immediately, just to keep your position open. For anyone using leverage, that's not a slap on the wrist, that's a gut punch. So what would you expect? You'd expect selling, you'd expect fear, you'd expect the usual headlines. Silver topped. Speculators got burned. Rally finished. Nothing to see here. Instead, we saw the opposite. We saw a dip that lasted hours. And then we saw buyers step in like they were waiting for the exact moment the system tried to scare everyone. Silver dropped into the low to mid-80s. And then it snapped back so hard it erased the margin hike fear and turned it into fuel. That's not normal. That's not a fragile rally. That's a market that has begun ignoring threats. And when a market starts ignoring threats, the balance of power shifts because margin hikes only punish one type of participant, leveraged paper traders. They don't punish the entity that shows up with cash and says, deliver the metal. They don't punish industrial buyers who can't pause production lines. They don't punish large holders who aren't borrowing to be in the trade. So when the dip gets bought aggressively after a margin hike, the message is loud. The bid beneath this market is not the same crowd that gets wiped out by margin calls. And that ides, where this starts becoming uncomfortable for the people who have relied on paper tricks for decades. Think about it this way. If you're short and you're using the exchange's rulebook as your shield, you need the market to fear the rulebook. You need traders to believe that every rally will be punished. You need the psychology to crack. Monday was supposed to crack it. Tuesday proved it didn't. Now, could we still see volatility? Absolutely. This is silver. Volatility is basically its personality. But volatility isn't the same as control. In a controlled market, the bad news button works on command. In an uncontrolled market, bad news becomes a buying opportunity. And that's exactly what Monday looked like, a discount window for serious buyers. Now, here's the part most people miss. A margin hike is loud, dramatic, and easy to report. But it's not the real story. The real story is in the boring data. Open interest, contract behavior, who is rolling, who is standing, and what month they're choosing. Because while the headlines scream margin hike, the futures market whispers something far more revealing. People are trying to get silver sooner, not later. Let me explain. In a normal futures market, if you're holding a contract and you don't want delivery, you roll forward. January rolls to March. March rolls to May. The game is kick the can. Rolling forward is the sign of comfort. It says, I trust the system. I'll take my exposure later. But what happens when traders start rolling backward? That's when things get strange, because rolling backward is irrational unless you're afraid. It means you rather hold a near-term contract closer to delivery, even if it costs more to do so. It means you're paying up for immediacy. It means you're cutting the line. And the data we're seeing points to exactly that behavior. Contracts leaving later months and appearing in nearer months. That is a massive red flag. And it's the kind of red flag the mainstream wanted to discuss, because it doesn't fit the everything is fine narrative. Rolling backward is not what happens in a market with comfortable inventories. It's what happens when participants start asking the only question that matters. Will the metal actually be there? And when that question enters the room, everything changes, because futures are not just a price, they are a promise. A contract is a claim. And the entire system only works as long as most people treat the claim as good as the thing itself. But the moment enough players decide they want the thing, not the claim, the paper structure starts to creak. That creaking is what you're hearing in the backward rolling. It's the sound of people losing patience with later. Now, why would anyone suddenly want silver now? Why not just wait until March? Because waiting assumes the pipeline is healthy. It assumes supply will arrive. It assumes the warehouses can allocate without drama. But what if the pipeline isn't healthy? What if the warehouses are being drained faster than they're refilled? What if the flow of fresh metal is being diverted before it ever reaches the public market? That's where the mining side enters. And this is the part that should make shorts lose sleep. A lot of silver isn't mined because companies wake up and say, let's mine silver. It's produced as a byproduct. It comes out of lead, zinc, and copper operations. So if the broader industrial cycle slows, those mines don't magically ramp silver production just because silver is screaming higher. They ramp their primary metal if it makes sense, and silver rides along. That means silver supply can get squeezed even as price rises. High prices don't automatically cure high prices in this market, at least not quickly. And even when silver is produced, the next question is, where does it go? In a clean textbook world, it gets refined. It becomes bars. It ends up in major vaulting centers. And it's available to the market. But the world we're in now isn't clean and isn't textbook. In this world, large industrial consumers don't want to gamble with inventory. They don't want to wake up one morning and discover their supply chain has a paper problem. So they do what powerful buyers always do. They go upstream. They try to secure production directly. They cut deals that never appear in warehouse reports. They bypass the public pool and create a private pipeline. And if enough of that happens, you can have production on paper and shortage in the visible market at the same time. That's why you can see inventories falling even while the world is still mining silver. Because the metal is being absorbed before it's ever offered. It isn't missing. It's just no longer available to the structure that shorts depend on. Now, let's talk about the phrase hanging over this entire situation, force majeure. Force majeure is the legal version of we can't do it. It's what happens when a supplier says we cannot meet this contract under current conditions. In commodities, that can happen for obvious reasons. Strikes, shutdowns, transport disruptions, political risk, refining bottlenecks. But it can also happen when the supply chain becomes so tight that fulfilling older commitments becomes impossible without breaking something else. And if miners or refiners begin using that language, it's not just a headline. It is a signal that physical constraints are overtaking the financial structure because the financial structure assumes delivery can always be sourced. If delivery can't be sourced, then shorts don't have an escape hatch. They can't call up supply and patch the leak. They can only buy back their paper. And when too many shorts try to buy back paper simultaneously, the chart does what charts do and squeezes. It goes vertical. Now, I want to slow down briefly and make this practical. Many people watching this are thinking, okay, silver is near $90. Is it too late? Is this the top? Is this a trap? Here's the honest answer. When a market enters discovery, it is both opportunity and danger. The opportunity is obvious. The trend can travel far beyond what feels reasonable. The danger is that the system will attempt more than one trick. If 15% didn't work, they can try 20%. If that fails, they can try 30%. They can tighten rules, change limits, adjust settlement incentives, and do everything possible to slow the stampede. So, you should expect attempts to create sharp drops. But here's the key difference that matters in 2026 versus the old playbook years. The old playbook worked best when there was plenty of metal available and the rally was mostly paper motion. In that environment, you slam margin, scare speculators, and the market caves. But when the rally is driven by physical urgency, margin hikes lose power because the players who truly need the metal are not leaving. They might welcome dips. They might use them to build inventory. And that turns suppression into acceleration. Now, there's another layer people should not underestimate: psychology. Markets are not just supply and demand, they are confidence. And confidence cuts both ways. When the exchange hits the panic button and price rallies anyway, shorts start to wonder what else won't work. They begin to wonder if they waited too long. They start imagining a scenario where they must cover into a runaway market. And that fear alone can create covering, not because they want to, but because they must. That SY failed smashes often mark the beginning of the real move because they flip the psychological script. Instead of longs fearing margin hikes, shorts begin fearing the longs. Now, let me bring this into the near-term map. We're sitting in the high 80s. The next obvious psychological line is 90. And beyond 90, the real headline magnet is 100. Triple digits changes the conversation. It forces attention. It forces the public to ask, why is this happening? And when the public starts asking, the capital flow shifts. But you should also know this. When the public arrives, volatility increases, momentum chasers appear, hot money shows up, and hot money can get shaken out brutally. So the move toward $100 could be fast, and it could be messy. But messy doesn't mean fake. It just means crowded. Now, I want to throw a question to you. Do you think the next margin hike will actually push silver down, or will it become another dip buying event that strengthens the rally even more? Drop your answer in the comments because I want to see where you think this power struggle goes next. And here's a second question. If the market is already shrugging off rule changes, what do you think the next weapon will be? Because they aren't going to simply sit back and watch. Now, quick side note. If you are into silver-related success stories like real people who positioned early and made life-changing moves, there's a link in the description to another channel that focuses on that. Check it out and subscribe over there too, because the mindset side of this trade is just as important as the chart. All right, back to the main thread. The most important thing to understand is that silver is not just a trade right now, it's becoming a referendum on trust. Trust in paper, trust in delivery, trust in the plumbing of the market, and the future's behavior, rolling toward the front of the line, tells you that trust is thinning. When enough players decide only physical counts, the paper market must reprice to match physical reality. That's the reset. Now, does that mean every rumor becomes true? No. Does it mean every day is green? No. But it does mean the old assumption, they can always smack it down, is starting to fail in real time. And when assumptions fail, repricing happens violently. So here's what I'm watching going forward. First, how the market reacts to the next attempt at pressure. If another hike happens and silver refuses to break, that's another brick removed from the wall of control. Second, the behavior of open interest and delivery month positioning. If backward rolling continues, it's telling you urgency is growing, not fading. Third, visible inventory trends. If metal continues leaving faster than it arrives, the math gets ugly quickly. And fourth, the language coming from the supply chain. Miners, refiners, transport, and industrial procurement. When can't deliver becomes a theme, the squeeze stops being theoretical. Now, the bigger picture. We live in an era where everyone wants certainty, but the system has been selling promises. Silver is one of the few markets where the promise can be stress tested in public, and right now, that test is failing. That's why the margin hike didn't work. Not because the exchange is weak, but because the underlying physical reality is stronger than the paper constraint. So, if you're sitting there thinking this is just another spike that will fade, ask yourself this: what would it take to actually stop it? More paper rules or more physical metal? Because rules can be written in an afternoon, but metal cannot be produced on demand. And if supply can't respond quickly, the price must do the rationing. It must move high enough to force someone to sell. And the crazy part, at $89 to $100, the world still wants more, which means the rationing price may be far higher than most people are emotionally prepared for. Now, I'm not telling you to be reckless. I'm telling you to be awake. This is a fast market, and fast markets punish arrogance, but they also reward clarity. So keep your eyes on the signal, not the noise. Keep your eyes on the behavior of people who actually take delivery, not the people who write headlines. And remember the lesson of this week. The system tried to slam the door and demand forced it open. Anyway, if you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to the channel. Quick click, you're in. And share it with someone who still thinks silver is just another commodity. Because what we're watching right now doesn't feel like another commodity cycle. It feels like something breaking. And when it shocks them, you'll remember exactly what happened this week. And if it breaks, the next move is going to shock a lot of